Welcome to Startup Wins. Twice a month, we share real stories and smart tips. Subscribe and join the journey.
Welcome back to Startup Wins. We have a special guest here today. Honestly, I've gotten to know our special guest through a few different meetings, but before we get into who she is, let me just introduce her. This is Ellie Sarmadi. I don't think I've ever even asked if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fine, Sarmadi. Yes.
Okay, awesome, awesome. Well, welcome to the show, Ellie. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself for our guests?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited to be chatting this hour. I'm the CEO of a company called Thravos. Thravos disrupts the sports space by creating new lines of engagement, new ways to engage, and new lines of monetization for athletes in ways that they haven't been able to do before. Previous to this, I come from a long history of family real estate, then into consulting for the big companies in New York City, then to business school, and then a relatively sizable Wall Street career where I moved around and saw a bunch of things and learned a bunch of things. And then from there, exited and wanted to go back to my entrepreneurial roots. So slowly made my way back by getting into venture investing, then to angel investing, and obviously now being the CEO of Thravos. So that's a short background on me career-wise. So I'm a mother. I have two amazing young girls, and every day I wake up thinking, how could I make this world a better place for them and others in their position, right? That are just sort of building their lives.
Yeah, no, that's one of the biggest, I would say, I don't want to call it challenges, but it's one of the biggest things that we do as people if we get that chance, right? As parents. And
Mhm.
I would argue sometimes it's even more challenging than the job that you have every day. So,
Yeah.
so no, thank you for even highlighting that. Maybe we'll get to talk a little bit about women of the future because I think in your past, from what I remember in our past conversations, you were kind of like this, rock star of a younger woman, and you were trying to navigate the different environments that society has. But like one thing that I think is always fascinating, and I'm glad that you're here, is I've heard that multiple times that there's a lot of funding that goes to men and not women in startups. And so I don't know, have you had those challenges? Do you know of that? Because you were on the other side as well early in your career,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, I was on the funding side for a few years, for a bunch of years actually. There's definitely inequality now, women just have a different way of asking for things. There's a lot of reasons for it, right? You got to be in the right clubs, you got to be at the right time in the right place, talking to the right people. Majority of funders are male. So there's that relatedness that you have to build as a female entrepreneur to the male, with the male investors. A lot of deals get done on the playing golf or on the court or whatever it is. And women are just having to learn to be part of those ecosystems, right? So to be able to be at the right place at the right time. But also we just have to be able to ask in the same way that most men ask for things, right? We're generally speaking, just the nature of women is just more reserved and more thinking before doing, whereas the male species just sort of like just go and do it, right? More and more women are learning to just go and do it, and hopefully we'll close this gap in the future.
Yeah, fingers crossed on that one. So building this startup, and you say Travis or Travos, or do you say Thravos because it's spelled TH?
And we leave it to the observers to use their judgment. We have people from other countries that don't necessarily pronounce TH in the way we pronounce TH. So we say travels, others say travels. What it means is it's indirectly driven from the Greek world. That means triumph. That's what it equates to, through a derivation of the word and then what it means and what it sounds like in in the language. So it means triumph because Thravos is all about winning. It's all about winning. It's all about succeeding, coming on top, sort of owning your power for the athletes, for the fans. We can talk a little bit more about what Thravos is as we go through our conversation, but that's what the name is supposed to represent, the culture of the ecosystem.
Well, were you an athlete? Was that part of the inspiration, or how did you come to, deciding on doing a sports oriented startup?
I was growing up, I was an athlete. At some point, I had the dream to make it to the Olympics. It was a little bit of a far-fetched dream because I was far from, even being in the path of doing that. But that was a dream as a child and as a teenager. I really wanted to kind of what excited me in swim. So I grew up with that sort of athlete mindset, right? I was always athletic. I was always competing in some shape or form, not professionally, but in high school and then in clubs and in organizations like that. And then going through the Wall Street experience, I was very in tune with the problem in sports for the athlete, the problem of engagement and monetization. I had a lot of friends that were athletes that felt the pain of how the system is broken. So I was familiar with it, and when I started to think about building something, coming from the Wall Street background, I wanted to choose a big problem that's a sustainable problem. I wanted to come up with a solution that would not be a me too, that would be unique and differentiated and very scalable. And the more we researched, the more this sort of came on top as like a big problem that has always been a problem, will always continue being one. As long as you have athletes coming into the system, they need to engage, they need to create new layers of engagement and monetization. That's not going to go away, right? Generally speaking, the solutions have only targeted the top layer of athletes. We call them the top 1%. Now, depending on the sport, that could be 10%, 15%, 20%. But regardless, the problem is very big and the gap is significant from the top athletes to the masses. So the solution is targeting the masses of the athletes. And like I said, because it's a big problem, there's a big value proposition and the revenue model is very attractive for everyone involved, including athletes, fans, brands, and founders and partners. This was what I wanted to be busy with at this point in my career.
And when you say problem, you're speaking to what, the compensation for these athletes, or what exactly? Could we like zero in a little bit on this problem that you speak of?
Ultimately is a lot of athletes don't make enough money or have enough money in order to pursue a career as an athlete full time. So that's the overarching problem. A lot of things lead into this. So they don't get enough sponsorship. They don't get to build a strong enough fan base, so they get sponsorship. They don't have the right agents, not the right mentorship. But it all comes down to they're just not making enough money in what they're doing. And they're having to go get a second or third job in order to even stay active as an athlete, to be able to hire the right coaches, to go to the right facilities, to have the right equipment. All this stuff costs money. To travel, all this stuff costs money. And unless they have the funding in order to pursue all these activities, they're just not going to be able to rise to the top. And a lot of things go into this equation. There's obviously the funding, then there's the ecosystem. There's no platforms for them to go build ecosystems, like ecosystem of fans. Yes, there's Instagram, there's Twitch, there's possibly OnlyFans, there's Patreon, but nothing is specifically targeting athletes and providing them the opportunity to really build that ecosystem. The features and the functions and the way the ecosystems are built and rolled out is not addressing the athlete problem in the way they should. So they're just sort of left not having solutions in order to make enough money, in order to get enough attention, and to be able to live a full-time athlete life. You end up having a lot of very talented athletes. We know a few we were talking about a few ourselves that end up taking other paths just because they can't sustain themselves.
I see that all the time. My brother, in particular, he joined the Montreal Expos early in his career, and he made $800 a month in
Mm.
single A ball. And then after, I think it was a year or two of it, he's just like, I can't sustain this, and so that's why he joined. And now he's rich. But I mean, maybe it was maybe it was a good decision, but but regardless, his dream was to pursue baseball. And
Mm.
he was an all-state player. He hit the home runs in the final innings of University of Washington's path to the College World Series. He could have been something, but as you state, maybe he just didn't have the ability to sustain his dreams. And so yeah, no, I mean, so what would you say is the like numbers of athletes who are probably leaving their various sports? Is it in the millions, would you say, or is this an
Yeah,
international problem?
this is an international problem. Yes. In the US, with the invent of NIL, now we're starting to bring about possible solutions, even though it's just scratching the top still. But it is an international, it's a global problem. And it's just part of being in the game. And the more solutions we have that address the problem, the less the problem is going to be a problem. It's not going to go away. It's just it keeps sustaining itself, and we have to keep giving it the solution to lessen the problem. But it's an interesting space for sure. But I mean, you see this problem across the board for artists, for musicians, for a lot of sort of creative people that need that community, need that ecosystem in order to grow and become what they want to be in the future, right? And they could have a lot of talents, but if they don't have the ecosystem and they can't make money from what they offer into this ecosystem, then the brands don't recognize them. The brands don't recognize them, then it just keeps going into that spiral.
As you've been speaking, and as I think about the business more and more, I think now all of a sudden I feel like your potential market cap is quite large because it could spread, like you said, from
Significant.
sports to music, and then potentially eventually the rest of society, right? Because this issue is actually prevalent in society with all the billionaires that we have who are growing richer by the minute, and the discrepancy of $500 billion versus somebody who can't even make more than 50K a year is
Yeah.
significant. So this is fascinating, actually, now thinking about it and talking about it a little bit more. Well, let's talk about maybe some basics, though, before we maybe dive in more into the problem. So you've been running this startup for how long has it been so far?
Like tail end of last year is when we got like seriously into full-time building this. Before that, we were building, we were messing around, but I was really busy with other things. I was, my portfolio companies and my investments and things like that. I still hadn't sort of closed those things down. So we got really focused end of last year. So now we're getting ready to launch in the next, few weeks or so. We're getting ready to launch an early version of it.
Well, your path sounds to me, I don't know, maybe, it's hard to say to equate it exactly the same, but when Jeff Bezos went and built Amazon, he was actually managing a lot of money, or he was doing a lot in the finance sector, right? And then as he explored different arenas or verticals or whatever you want to call it, he kind of landed on what he ended up doing. But is that how you kind of came down to this thing? Like, you've seen many businesses in your life, and you've seen, so many different, like, I guess, startups to, enterprise organizations. And so I imagine you probably have a lot, and I don't know honestly all your operator experience, but yeah, why did you end up here in your life? Like, this is the time to start building a startup.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like a clear-cut plan of this is the time I want to end up doing this. When I was a teenager, besides wanting to become a swimmer in the Olympics, I also had this sort of weird dream that I wanted to end up on Wall Street. And that was sort of like what I wanted to do. It was, I'm going to be an Olympian, maybe, but at the same time, if like that doesn't work out, then like the next thing that I want to do is I want to end up on Wall Street. For some odd reason, 16, 17, that was what was on my mind. And I don't know why. I guess envisioned it as like what in my world back then success would have been measured as, of like doing something that's hard, that's not easily achievable, that Also just makes a lot of money, and that's cool. Let's make a lot of money, because I came from a really humble upbringing. And so, I really wanted to do something significantly different from where we were political people, and we had to give up a lot. So we had a lot, and then we had to give up a lot, and then we ended up with nothing, needing to as a young family, needing to build from scratch. And so I just didn't want to ever go through that again. So it was all about, what can I do that's pretty impressive, that's hard to do, that makes a lot of money? Oh, okay, Wall Street, investment banking. And so my goal was to end up there, and I did different things in order to end up there. Everything I did in my career leading up to that was like a plan in order to. And so eventually, once I was there, I got to see things on the inside, and it just wasn't as exciting as it looked like on the outside, right? I mean, the culture, there wasn't a lot of human support, like human emotions, humanity, people caring about each other, very nurturing. None of that, obviously, you can imagine. In high finance, there's none of that. And I'm very empathetic, so I always felt like part of me was just not getting fueled, right? It just was always ignored. There was no room for empathy. It was dog eat dog world, right? You just like run and you win, and then you step on everyone else in order to win. And then once you win, then you step on others higher up to win. That's sort of the culture of Wall Street. So obviously I stayed for a bunch of years, but I didn't feel fulfilled as a human. I felt like I was essentially a coupon clipper. I had the opportunity to make a lot of money, yes, be in the corner office of one of these giant investment banks. I was at Morgan Stanley, but I also had offers from Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch back then, so all the top banks. But then I just couldn't see the path forward being fulfilling for me. And even though I stayed for a bunch of years, each year that I was there longer, I just felt more and more convinced that wasn't where I'm meant to be long term, right? That I crave to be creating value, not just making money. So not everyone comes to that conclusion as early as I did, and I feel lucky that I was able to come to that conclusion early on in life and be able to kind of pivot. So when I left, the goal was to move toward being more entrepreneurial, being toward creating value for the society, for the world, while making money, right? Not just making money. So that was kind of how my path took place, right? So I went from there to venture, to then investing in startups and supporting them. I roll up my sleeves every time I invested, and I would get super involved. And then eventually it was like, okay, now the next phase of this is let me actually build. Because first I had all the experiences that I needed, but also the right time in life. I could afford not having a big income, and I had money to be able to support the early stages of the startup and all that. So it wasn't planned out specifically as far as time is concerned, but I knew that I was slowly headed in that direction.
Well, it's fascinating as our conversations have progressed. One thing that I noticed in our last conversation is how methodical you were in building the startup. It makes me think right now, maybe this is the right path for a startup founder, right? Because sometimes startup founders straight out of college with these great ideas, get their friends and they jump on board and they're like, let's do it, fail about 15 times. And then they get to their whatever startup and then they finally succeed. But you've already done some of the things, before this startup now. And so I think you maybe had lessons already, along the way. What do you think? What is the ideal startup path? Maybe this is the ultimate startup wins, is you traversed life in a way that kind of prepared you for now.
I don't think there is a formula. A bunch of years ago, I had a friend who was also in finance. He was in the hedge fund industry, so had gone from investment banking into the buy side and then to building. And he had this sort of like real mindset of, hey, if you're ever going to start something, you got to do step one is this, step two is this, you got to go step by step. If you fall out of the path of the standard path of doing it, then you're screwed. There's no way it's going to work out. And then he ended up kind of not doing it traditional himself, because you get faced with stuff and you have to deal with it and you fall off the path. You can't just keep yourself on a path. It's not a rigid world, right? A startup is constantly maneuvering, pivoting. You never know what's going to hit you. And he ended up having a very successful exit, and that was that. And so, it just as an example of, I don't think there is a formula of, well, if you're young, you're not going to make it. And if you're older and you've had experiences, you are going to make it. Each startup is its own animal. It's going to have its own challenges, its own ups and downs. You can have tons of experience and not make it, or be brilliant as a college kid and come out and make something that is gangbusters, like Facebook, for instance. So anything's possible. I don't think there's really a formula. The consistent component of it, in my humble opinion, is that persona of persisting, right? Of like one of those, I don't know if you've seen those blow up dolls that you punch and then they go back and they come back up. Like you see them in like kids parks and things like that. Sometimes you got to be one of those dolls where you're like, you never stay down. You just bounce back up. Doesn't matter what happens. If you don't have that in you, you're older, younger, experience, no experience, you're going to fail, because it's just going to require so many recoveries from bruises and cuts and all the failed thoughts and processes. And if you don't have it in you to get up the next day, or even just in a few hours, your recovery time span has to be super short, right? And just getting up and feeling like you're going to win it all over again the next day. So that you have to have. Other than that, I don't think there's like a very specific formula of what is going to make it and what's not going to make it.
There's definitely dynamics of timing, right? Because sometimes some industries are prepared to be, I guess, upended, or as Uber and all these other organizations have done, literally change the entire ecosystem. And then there's other industries where maybe an incremental approach perhaps does well, right? So you're right. And then it's the team. Like, for example, I imagine right now, I think we had this discussion earlier, is how large is your team? And then the other question is like, who do you choose? Let me ask you that question. How's that been going? And the whole selection of who do you work with to basically succeed with is, I think, a very interesting question in my mind. I've tried multiple times to build the ideal team, and with my current venture, I feel very lucky. But how about you?
It's like anything else, right? Like when you get married to someone, 50% of the time you think it's going to work out, and 50% of the time it doesn't work out. So there's a component of life in everything we do, right? From my perspective, I'm a work dog. I work 24/7. I work over the weekend. I work on holidays. It's just my design. And it's not to say that I expect anyone else to be exactly like me, but if there isn't some component of just wanting to do this, and they're just kind of desk workers, it's just not going to work for our team. Because I'm going to be working and then the whole team is going to be off. That's just not going to work well. So that's one of the first things I look at. And I always preface, like when I talk to someone that we're going to bring on board, I say, listen, there's going to be weekend requirements, sometimes over holidays, and it is a startup. So that's just basically kind of anticipated and accepted, I guess expected, I should say. So, but I'm very clear about that expectation, that this is not a normal schedule. The pay is not going to be huge. So if you're looking for a major payout at this point, this isn't it for you. We're all doing this for the promise of the near future. And if you can't get on that train and have the same spirit as a founder, even if you're not getting paid as much and you may not have as much equity as I do, for instance, then it's just right away, it's not going to work out. And then, it's very important to be creative and resourceful. You could be super, super smart, but if you're not resourceful and innovative and creative, it's not going to work in this environment, in this store. For us, maybe it works for some other startups. Well, for us, if you can't just go and come up with solutions that we can at least try for things, then there's no fit. I expect everyone on the team to think. I always say at the beginning of every meeting, I say, hey, you are expected to think, right? If you cannot think and you just come up with problems and you can't at least propose even a fractional solution, it's not going to work. So I test people in interviews and discussions on things like that to make sure some of the major components, which are being able to work as hard as you can, being able to be innovative and creative and think, because these things are cultural things that we have in common. But you bring people and then you realize it's not a tie out, and then unfortunately then it doesn't work, and then you look at someone else. For the more senior partners, you want to make sure that you don't have a turnover like that, obviously. But for the junior guys, it's not like the person comes in and they're there forever. We have a few. We've been lucky, actually. The people that we have been with us since the beginning, and they're here, and I think we're going to be together for long term, and they're going to keep kind of moving up as we add more people underneath them. So we've been lucky, but I think big part of it has been because we do really good analysis up front of culture fit.
Speaking of culture, we met each other on our mutual friend David Yee's Founders Chapel, and I discovered you because I could hear in your voice and how you spoke in that little session in a way that basically broadcasted your ethos. And because of your ethos, I was like, oh, I got to speak to this woman, or I can't remember if you reached out to me or I reached out to you. I feel like that's one of the startup wins, or that's something that any startup founder probably should think about, because as people traverse in life, if they look more greedy, or if they have poor rhetorical skills, or if they don't show good work ethic, I think you end up probably not meeting certain people. Curious, what are your thoughts there? Because since I could feel your ethos, I imagine the people who are around you are probably very similar to you. And, even in this entire interview that we've had so far, I've learned a few things in that you just want to make things better. You want to make people happy. You want to contribute to society, right? And so those sort of, I think, value props, or those sort of elements to your personality probably attract people who are willing to work for less, right?
I think so. I think, one thing that I grew up with, my father always said, don't be an ordinary person. Whatever you do in life, just don't be an ordinary person. And so I grew up with my biggest fear in life is to be ordinary. I worked really hard throughout life, not to have an ordinary life, and not to be an ordinary person, and not to do ordinary things. And if that means like that I do, and every single day I try to do something that's like outside of ordinary. So I do think that having that persona where you can inspire people obviously attracts people too. And if you're running a team, then you can excite your team, and you can help them see the vision and build that energy within the team, so that people are willing to go along the ride with you, right? So I think those things are important. It's part of being a leader, right? And if you're running a team, you got to be a leader one way or another. So whether you do that through inspiration, through whatever your means are, but I've always believed in leadership by example, and leadership by, I don't know, I haven't even like attached terms to it, but we're very sort of flat, and I always express that. I'm like, I tend to keep the organization flat. Everyone's going to be a boss, right? And I want you to have the mentality of an owner, and you will be compensated for it. But those are the people we want. My leadership style is very sort of empowering others to be leaders versus suppressing them or overpowering them or like dominating, So there's different styles. And if you're introspective and you have thought about things and throughout your life, you'll come up to those conclusions of you can either by accident be that person, or if you learn what it is and you study it, then you can make sure you repeat it, which becomes much more powerful and sustainable, right? And so I think I'm at a place in life where I have thought about these things actively, in an introspective way. And I have, decided I'll face a situation where my inner self wants to kind of snap and be a certain way, but I'm able to say, well, that's not going to be aligned with my leadership style. So let me dial it back and go. So I'm able to kind of manage, right, my own reaction to things, which creates better relationships for sure within the work environment and with our team. Thanks for saying that, though. Thank you. I appreciate that.
It was just something I felt, and it's built over time. Every element and how you answer questions and how you're approaching problems is very fascinating. I mean, it's funny because as we get older, we start to see things a little bit more than we did when we were younger. So I see it a little bit more clearly. So, but it's very interesting to see how you work and think. This flat structure, this flat management structure is a very interesting one. I believe in it as well. I hope that society can do more flat type of decision making, but don't you think it's a little frustrating sometimes? It's a little more inefficient. Sometimes it takes more consensus. Sometimes you don't even know if you have consensus. So what do you think about this flat structure? I mean, obviously you believe in it, but do you feel like it just takes more time? These are probably intuitive thoughts, but just curious what you think more, diving in a little bit on this.
It's a very good question. And the time is the investment to empower people to be bigger than they can be. So you just have to really be conscious of how much investment is required. And that comes with choosing the right people that are capable of making decisions and thinking creatively and being innovative and all those sorts of things. But if you suppress them, and you see that with parents and kids, like I do that at home with my kids, where I empower them. Even if I want to just go and make a decision and make it faster, I'll take an extra 10 minutes and I'll empower my children to think and come up with the decision themselves, so that the next time, it's actually going to be much more efficient. But my investments on the ground floor is going to lead to much more efficiency in the near future. Now, if the team is just incapable and can't think and can't do anything, then you just have the wrong people. But if you have the right people, if you've chosen right, and you have stayed true to the commitment of having the right people in. So you could possibly bring someone in because it seemed like it's the right person based on all the analysis you did. But then within the first 3-4 months, you realize it's not, it's just not a fit. It's just not that person. Fine, unfortunately, you just have to rotate until you have the right strong team in, right? And then I believe we do now at this point, even though we're very lean. I think we have, real thinkers and real innovators, and everyone steps up and they do their own research and they come up with solutions on calls. But I do have to step back sometimes. Like sometimes I have an answer, I want something to be a certain way, and I'll ask, what do you think? What is your opinion? Right? I want to hear what they have to say. I want them to think and not just do. So there's a certain level of training that you put on, that you commit yourself to. But I think we'll see long term. I think it'll turn out to be, well, it's already showing real great fruit where like everyone's participating, at their own level, in their own category. They're participating, they're kind of leading the way. So it could be very inefficient if you have the wrong people, for sure, and then it's just not going to work, right?
Right. No, there's definitely certain personalities that don't mold well or meld well with flat hierarchies. So I'm going to jump into two more kind of topics that are unfortunately very large, but hopefully we can kind of address them somewhat, in an efficient manner, obviously due to time. But you're solving this problem with the blockchain, right? Or you're solving this with this newfangled way of doing things. Tell us a little bit about that, and then maybe we'll also end with, before we get into the 3 questions and 1 question before that, that's kind of important to me. But how does blockchain work in this whole thing? And then maybe we'll talk about AI, which everybody talks about.
We are using blockchain. We're not solving it with blockchain. We're bringing in blockchain technologies to enhance the solutioning, to enhance and make it more efficient, the solutioning. I think there's a realization that there is no Web 2, Web 3, right? Web 2 is the world. It's the world we live in. It's like 3-dimensional, and there is internet, and there is, all these things. But there's the Web3 technologies can enhance and can fill the gaps. It's not like you can, but it's not working, honestly. So when the Web3 technology blockchain came into place, a lot of the projects that were in that world were trading projects and yield projects and liquidity and finance, all those things. Which you think about the population of the world, what's the percentage of humans in the world that want to be trading or want to be taking chance with money and putting it into risky value propositions that give them a high yield? So it's a very small proportion of humans that would want to be engaged in those types of things. And then you'll have this whole blockchain space that was just focused on these yield products, infrastructure, yield trading, DeFi, all these kinds of things, right? A lot of people made money and a lot of people lost money because there just wasn't enough customers. So they would launch these tokens because they call that kind of blockchain technology. They would launch tokens for these projects that were all yield focused and trading focused. And then the token would dip because there would be no real use case for that token. It would just be, we have a token. Okay, what's the point of this token? Really like a meme token, right? Investors would get into these things, they would pump it up 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 times. They would get out and then the retail would suffer and then the token will go to zero. And this has just been a repetitive type of outcome for all these projects in the Web3 space that are on blockchain. So I've been saying, like yelling and screaming that like this space needs to transition. There's just this is not sustainable. We need real world problems with real world solutions where we're using AI and Web3 to enhance the solution, not have it be the solution only. And that's what we are doing. So we are a fully Web2, if for the lack of a better term, ecosystem. We are a marketplace where the athletes are on the supply side, the fans, future fans, fitness enthusiasts are on the demand side of this equation. There's features and functions going on that are all kind of like standard Web2 technology, subscription channel, payment for sessions that fans might want to book a session with an athlete, for instance, like all kind of traditional technologies, right? And then we have put on top of this ecosystem gaming, which is, as fans come in, they can compete with each other. So they can engage in a sports related activity and they can win things. So this is where like the whole Web3 component comes into play to create this sort of gaming competitive experience that adds to the engagement of the fans and creates more stickiness, where now athletes can actually pick up new fans, build better communities that are interested because they have things to do. That's like, so we're using Web3 to create these new ways of engagement and monetization. So we're not a blockchain product, right? We're actually a Web2 product. So, and then AI is in the same way. For instance, we run AI models on the future potential of athletes. So we get the stats of their activities on court, in the apps, social engagement, the coaches they had, the agents, the games they won, lost, sort of the amalgamation of all this data and make a prediction of what their future potential could be. And then creating decentralized opportunity for brands to sponsor athletes directly. And now the whole pool of sponsorship opens up to athletes that have 5,000 followers, 10,000 followers, 50,000 followers versus just, if you don't have 300,000 followers, we can't even look at you, or whatever that number is for the different brands, right? So that's like one example of how we're using AI, is kind of making these predictions and having the model that would, put those analysis and data in front of brands. So I don't know if that answered your question, but we're using these technologies as a supplement, not as like a standalone.
You answered it excellently. I didn't expect such a great answer to hit both topics. Frankly, the whole AI space is something that almost every day is constantly changing. So because of it being AI, right? And it's just fascinating. On this hike this morning, I was actually thinking of something very similar to what you just described. So it's fascinating how, frankly, yeah, you're doing what my brain was thinking, but I think we think similarly. So maybe that's the reason why. But I'll be honest, I didn't understand the business, but I knew you as a person were a special person. And so I could feel that you were building something great. And then, other people that I introduced you to were also wonderful people who ended up liking you. So I only see a rich future for you moving forward.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
yeah, of course. Well, with that said, we like to end the show with a few questions. One is maybe a little bit more serious, and it's dedicated to my cousin who unfortunately took her life in the 20s, which is actually when the athletes are at their prime, or perhaps
Mm.
a time where a lot of pressure's on them. I wonder in your life, if you can reflect back on that time, what did you do to get through some of the hard times? Unfortunately, she decided to take her life. She tried it twice and she
I'm
succeeded
sorry.
the second effort. But what did you do at that time to, deal with those hard times?
Oh, you can't really compare, right? I mean, people will live different lives and have different ways to deal with difficult times, right? For me, it was always like there's a bigger future ahead, and I that was very real for me. It's never about this minute. Even if I get the most amazing news right at this minute, I don't get super excited because to me it's like always, what's the next thing? I get excited and I try to take note, but it's always like, okay, now tomorrow is bigger, or this next thing that we're doing is bigger. So there's always been that perspective of, and that's good and bad, right? Because like I can never really kind of sit here, relax, and enjoy the moment. I'm always sort of driving for the next thing. So that's the kind of downside of that. But the upside is that I'm kind of driven to get to the next thing. So failure never phases me. I might get down for an hour or 2 hours, and then I kind of bounce back up. I don't know. I've analyzed that because unfortunately I had someone in my life that did the same, and it really made me sit down and think about like what causes someone to go that route versus otherwise. And honestly, I think it comes down to family, having that unconditional love of your parents, and some of us unfortunately don't have that, and maybe that causes that sort of like feeling of what's here for me. Like there's no groundedness, no amount of wealth, success, education, none of that gets you that level, that kind of feeling of being super grounded here on earth and like giving meaning to like, unless you're like super religious or something like that. So that kind of putting that aside. Yeah, so I think it comes down to that sort of fundamental connection with humans in your life, whether that's like your immediate blood family or you created that for yourself through friends because maybe you didn't have that with family. Some people don't, but like having that unconditional sort of like belonging and love and affection with a bunch of people in your life. I think it's what keeps you grounded. But then, some of us are just more driven than others. Like I just like, for me, it was always like about the next thing. So like I said, failure never got me down for too long. So, but everyone has to come up with their own solution, right? Because like not everyone has this level of emotional strength as I do. Some are more fragile and they just have to come up with other solutions that would help them keep going. Life is not easy. Life is hard.
It is. My mom and my fiance are kind of like you. So, nothing ever, takes them down. They always get right back up. So, yeah, you three are a special breed. And, your families are lucky to have you, by the way. So,
Thank
the last three questions are a little, serious, and the last one's a little less serious. But who would you say in the final three Qs is a hero, somebody who you could say is somebody you looked up to in your life or today?
Kind of untraditional. My hero is my mother. She's a superstar. She's done so much and she's built so much, and just her strength I really learned from her, and I have become much like her, actually. She's definitely my hero. She's lived a very difficult life and she's come through and she's established tons of successes. She's very successful today and has been for a long time now, but has kind of like gotten up in the face of a lot of atrocity. And so she's definitely my hero. Yeah. Yeah, and I learn from her every day, in this like having the strength and keep getting up and keep going for it. It's like a daily, wow, that's my role model. That's my hero.
No, I love that answer, and I'll be honest, it's probably the biggest or most answered answer, and so other questions typically get different folks as the answer, but the mothers in our society have won that award, which I'm really happy to hear because my mom as well is the same, and no, she sounds fantastic. It also makes me think like maybe I should interview your mother or my mother and all the mothers for this show because they might have all the secrets that we all need, but yeah, that usually they deliver that over a lifetime, not necessarily in
Yeah.
some podcasts. Well, you spoke of models rather, and she's also a role model. But could you choose another one or two people that are great role models? Because I think today, I feel like we've needed role models probably more today than ever. And so, curious if you have any role models that you can point to.
I have had role models. One of my most impactful role model was this guy, Robert Mendel. I think I mentioned him to you. He definitely shaped the path in my career. He won the Nobel Prize in economics long ago. Now I don't remember the year at this point, but he really mentored me in such a deep way, in a way that really made an impact to the decisions that I made in my early 20s, where it really defined who I am today. Yeah, so he was not so much like the life that he had lived or the ways that he was living, but just who he was for me was really impactful in the decisions that I made. I don't right at this minute have anyone specific that I'm kind of like have in my mind that I'm following or that I want to step in footsteps of. It's interesting that you asked that because maybe that's missing and I should look outside and see like who do I want to step in their footsteps at this point in my career. So I don't have like an answer for today, who is my role model, but it's a good ask. I will search.
Well, it may be a commentary. I've had actually several people say they don't have role models, and and I think that's interesting because the other questions are easier to answer. But if we are lacking those role models, it's kind of sad that society doesn't have as many, and maybe that's one missing piece that we need to think about. But I also point to, which I think is funny, when the people who do answer that question with no role models, I always think about, well, maybe you're the role model. So perhaps it also answers in a meta format, or way, maybe it ends up being you because you can't find anybody else who does all the things that you do. So I'll just propose that for today. So anyway,
Okay.
and then last question is usually pretty easy for some, but it sounded like when I threw it at you earlier, it might be a little bit more challenging. But what is your favorite food, or what's one of your favorite things you like to eat?
Uh, mm. I don't think it's that difficult. I'm Persian and I love Persian food. And there is a plate called korma sabzi, which is amazing. Everyone should try it. That is my favorite food. That's my number one. Anytime I think I want to have something I really, want to have right at this minute, it like the first would be korma sabzi. So if you haven't had it, I have to send you a recipe or take you out to have korma sabzi when we're in the same geography next.
Yeah. Well, first off, could you, tell me a little bit more about because I can't even understand what you're saying right now. So what exactly is this? And this is the
Well,
first time
it's
I've heard it.
So it's certain unique vegetables, not like in the sense of the North American. They're all sort of green leafy vegetables mixed with beef, chunks of beef, and then there is red beans, and this whole thing is like it's like a stew, and it goes on rice, basmati rice. So most of the Persian meals is stew with rice. And so this is just another kind of version of that stew with rice, but it's a very unique mix of very sort of, I don't know, unique tasting leafy vegetables with the lime and the lemon. And you just have to try it. It's really difficult to describe it. You'll have to try it.
It sounds wonderful actually after you did describe it. So I look forward to tasting it at some point. Yeah. I have yeah, a few good Persian friends and they never shared that with me. So I'm glad to learn about it today. So yeah, my roommate in college or roommate post college is Persian, and so we always end up. We ate at an Indian restaurant last. We ate at a sushi restaurant before that. So
yes, to take it to a Persian restaurant. That's it. You
yeah,
know.
yeah. No, 100%. Well, awesome. Well, this has been a wonderful hour with you. But what I sense is when people get to listen to you and see you here on video, they'll probably want to interview you beyond today. So you'll be possibly a target for future podcast interviews or video interviews, whatever you call the video format. How do people reach out to you? How can they find you? What can they do to learn more about it? As far as the company and perhaps what if they're interested in investing? Can you tell us a little bit about what they can do to do either one of those things?
Yeah, 100%. So LinkedIn is one of the best places to find me. I am the only Ellie Sarmadi on LinkedIn. So it's very easy to find. Outside of LinkedIn, email. Again, I'm Ellie, ellie.s@thravos.io. So email is another source of getting in touch with me, but I'm very easily found on LinkedIn, and I'm very responsive on LinkedIn. So
awesome.
and yes, we do have a round open, just to kind of round that out. We were just opening up our seed round. So
okay.
Open to talking to investors that are interested.
Are there any minimums just for, people who do want to possibly get serious?
Yeah, the minimum is 25,000. So pretty much any investor can get in.
That's good to know. So yeah, awesome. Well, I wish you the best of luck with this round. I'm thankful for our time today, and then I'm also more appreciative of all the times that we've spent up through today. Thank you so much, Ellie.
Thank you, Brandon. I appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great day.
If your calendar isn't already set, you're missing out on startup wins. Industry leaders, top advisors, and incredible tips await. Come back for future great episodes and entertaining guests, and come back for more insider strategies and incredible stories from the brightest VCs, founders, and operator experts. We're bringing you the best in the business twice a month. Hit that bell and stay winning with Startup Wins. See you soon.